The Whitmore estate sat at the end of Lakeview Drive like a crown that had forgotten how to be gentle. 40 rooms, marble floors that echoed every footstep like a warning, and gardens so perfectly manicured that even the roses seemed afraid to grow crooked. People in the town of Cedar Falls, Connecticut, called it the most beautiful home in the county. The staff who worked inside it called it something else entirely, though never out loud, and never where anyone important might hear. Marcus Whitmore was 33 years old, and by every measurable standard, he had conquered the world. His tech firm, Whitmore Digital Solutions, had revenues that made financial journalists reach for superlatives. His face appeared on magazine covers. His name was spoken with the kind of reverent awe in business circles from New York to San Francisco. He was tall, quietly handsome in a way that suggested he had never needed to try very hard at anything, with dark eyes that could be warm when he was alone and distant when he was performing the role of Marcus Whitmore, billionaire. He was, by all accounts, a decent man. His housekeeper of 12 years, Mrs. Edna Calloway, said he remembered her birthday every year without being reminded. His driver, Thomas, said he had never once been shouted at in a decade of service. The gardeners said he sometimes came outside at dawn and just stood there watching the sun come up, like a man who was still searching for something he couldn't name. And then there was Celeste. Celeste Hargrove had arrived in Marcus's life 18 months ago at a charity gala in Manhattan, wearing a red dress and a smile that felt like a door swinging open. She was beautiful in the way that certain dangerous things are beautiful, compelling, impossible to look away from, with an elegance that seemed designed to make everyone around her feel slightly insufficient. Marcus had been charmed immediately. Most people were. That was Celeste's particular gift. What the charm concealed became apparent slowly, like a tide going out to reveal what had always been on the ocean floor. The staff at Whitmore Estate learned within her first visit that Celeste had standards. Not the reasonable kind, not preferences or sensibilities, but standards wielded like weapons. A coffee that arrived at 88 degrees instead of 90 was cause for a withering look that could strip the confidence from a grown adult. Towels folded with a crease in the wrong direction resulted in a dressing down so precise and cold that the young housemaid, Jenny, had cried in the laundry room for 20 minutes afterward and told no one. A dinner plating she deemed pedestrian once sent the chef, a man who had trained in Paris, back to the kitchen with shaking hands. Nobody complained to Marcus. He was busy, always busy, and Celeste was his fiancée. The engagement ring on her finger was a 3-carat emerald-cut diamond that seemed to catch the light and throw it back sharper than it arrived. She would be the mistress of this house someday soon, and everyone understood, with a quiet resignation of people who have no other options, that you do not report the incoming queen to the current king. It was into this house, into this specific climate of beautiful fear, that Sophia Reyes arrived on a Tuesday morning in early April. Sophia was 28 years old. With dark hair she kept in a practical braid, warm brown eyes that were accustomed to noticing things other people missed, and the particular exhausted grace of a woman who had been carrying more than her share of the world for quite some time. She had come to Cedar Falls 2 years ago from Chicago, after her husband Daniel had died, a sudden, terrible heart attack at 31 that had rewritten her entire life in a single afternoon. She had come because her cousin lived here, because the cost of living was manageable, because she needed to start over in a place that didn't have Daniel's ghost on every corner. She had taken the housekeeping position at Whitmore Estate because it paid well, offered benefits, and allowed her to bring her daughter. That last part had required a conversation with Mrs. Calloway, who had then had a quiet conversation with Marcus himself, and Marcus had said, without hesitation, without conditions, that a child was not a problem. Her name was Lily. Lily Reyes was 3 years old and had inherited her father's curiosity and her mother's eyes and some quality entirely her own that made people stop and look at her the way people stop to look at unexpected flowers growing through sidewalk cracks. She had a gap between her front teeth that appeared when she grinned. She called butterflies flutterbees and had not yet been corrected because everyone who heard it found they didn't have the heart. She carried a stuffed elephant named Gerald everywhere she went, holding him by one threadbare ear, and she had opinions, strong, clearly expressed, unambiguous opinions, about everything from the flavor of her morning oatmeal to the precise position of her blanket before sleep. Lily's world was small and complete and joyful in the way that only the worlds of very young children can be, full of wonder, unburdened by consequence, lit from within by a trust in people that hadn't yet learned to be conditional. On the morning Sophia began her first full week of work, Lily was settled in the small sitting room adjacent to the kitchen that Mrs. Calloway had quietly designated as the little one's corner. There was a soft mat, a basket of toys, a low table where Lily could draw, and a window that looked out onto the garden where birds came to the stone fountain every morning like clockwork. Lily had decided within minutes of discovering this window that watching birds was one of the finest available activities. Sophia moved through her morning tasks with the efficiency of someone who had learned to work fast because time was always short. She polished, she organized, she refreshed the flower arrangements in the front hall, she stripped and remade the guest beds in the East Wing. She was quiet and careful and thorough, and the other staff, who had been watching her with the cautious friendliness of people who have learned not to get attached too quickly, began, slowly, to relax around her. She had a way of listening when people talked that made them feel heard rather than merely tolerated. She made the older housekeeper, Mrs. Calloway, laugh at something by 11 o'clock, which the other staff noted was unusual before noon. Marcus passed her in the hallway of the East Wing at 10:30. He was on his phone, walking with the slightly distracted energy of a man whose mind was always running a second conversation beneath the surface of the one he was having. He glanced up as he passed, met Sophia's eyes for a fraction of a second, and gave a brief, genuine nod. The nod of a man who sees the people in his house, not the nod of a man performing the role of someone who sees them. Sophia nodded back and continued down the hallway. She did not yet know what this house would ask of her. She did not yet know what her daughter would do. She did not yet know that 3-year-old Lily, with her stuffed elephant and her gap-toothed grin and her absolute absence of fear, was about to change everything. Spring arrived at the Whitmore estate in stages. Crocuses first, then forsythia, then the great old cherry trees along the south garden wall erupting in pale pink that lasted just long enough to feel like a promise. The staff noted the seasons not by the calendar, but by the rhythm of the house, and this spring had its own particular rhythm. Celeste Hargrove was visiting more frequently. The engagement was progressing. There were wedding planners and venue discussions and conversations behind closed doors that filtered through the house the way all important conversations do in large homes, in fragments, in overheard syllables, in the careful expressions of people who know more than they are saying. Celeste arrived on a Friday afternoon in the third week of April with 2 pieces of luggage, a personal assistant named Priya who moved through every room slightly ahead of her like an advance scout, and a mood that the staff read immediately and wordlessly communicated to one another through glances and the precise choreography of people making themselves useful and invisible simultaneously. She was not in a good mood. The wedding planner had apparently made a suggestion about floral arrangements that Celeste had found not merely wrong but personally offensive. The drive from Manhattan had taken 40 minutes longer than expected due to construction on I-95. And Marcus, who was supposed to have met her in the front hall, had been delayed on an international call that had run over and had sent Thomas with his apologies and a promise to be done within the hour. Thomas had delivered this message with great diplomacy. Celeste had received it without any. She moved through the ground floor of the estate like weather, the kind that makes people check windows and consider where they've left their umbrellas. Jenny, the young housemaid who had cried in the laundry room, saw her coming down the main corridor and found an immediate reason to be in a different part of the house. The chef altered the timing of his afternoon prep work to minimize kitchen traffic. Even Duchess, the elderly golden retriever who belonged to Marcus and who had never in 11 years of life met a person she didn't love immediately, retreated to her bed in the study with a dignity that suggested it was simply time for a nap. Sophia was in the front parlor, reshuffling a bookshelf that had been reorganized incorrectly by the weekend cleaning service, when Celeste came in. She looked up, straightened, and gave the polite, professional acknowledgement of a staff member who understands the hierarchy of a house. "You're the new one," Celeste said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am. Sophia Reyes. I started 2 weeks ago." Celeste looked at her the way you look at a piece of furniture you're not sure fits the room. "The books in this parlor are organized by color," she said. "Not by author." Sophia looked at the shelf. "I apologize. I was told the previous arrangement." "By color," Celeste repeated, with the patience of someone explaining something for what she has decided is the last time. "The aesthetic of this room is very specific. I chose it personally. Please don't alter it again." "Of course," Sophia said. "I'll fix it right away." Celeste left. Sophia stood with a book in each hand for a moment, breathing carefully, and then began putting them back. Lily had been in her corner in the sitting room adjacent to the kitchen for most of the morning, occupied with a set of large wooden puzzles that she approached with the intense concentration of a scientist. She had completed the elephant puzzle, the frog puzzle, and was making significant progress on the giraffe puzzle when the sounds of the house shifted in the way that they had recently begun to do when certain visitors arrived, a kind of tightening, like a held breath. Lily noticed sounds the way very young children notice everything, completely, without filtering, without the adult habit of deciding in advance what is and isn't worth paying attention to. She noticed that Mrs. Calloway had stopped humming when she walked past the sitting room door. She noticed that Thomas came through the kitchen very quickly and left again through the back. She noticed that the energy of the house had changed. She went back to her giraffe puzzle. Gerald the elephant sat propped against her knee, patient and faithful, one button eye catching the afternoon light from the garden window. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway at 3:30, phone finally silent, looking like a man released from a meeting that had lasted 3 hours too long. He paused at the sitting room door, which was ajar, and looked in at Lily, who looked back at him with the frank, uncalculating gaze of a toddler who has not yet learned to perform friendliness. "Hi," said Lily. "Hi," said Marcus. "I did the elephant," she informed him, pointing to the completed puzzle. "That's impressive," Marcus said, and meant it in the way adults mean things when children strip away the necessity for pretense. He had spoken to Sophia 3 times since her arrival, brief, professional exchanges, and had observed in those conversations that she was someone who had learned to be careful. He understood the shape of that kind of learned carefulness. He had people in his life who had been made careful by circumstance. He did not yet know that what was coming would make carefulness irrelevant. The confrontation happened at 4:15. Celeste had been moving through the house with Priya, taking notes for the wedding, for the post-wedding renovation she was already planning, for the reorganization of the domestic staff's responsibilities that she had decided was necessary and overdue. She had been in the East Wing, then the dining room, and now she came into the kitchen corridor with the forward momentum of a woman who does not pause. Lily had left her corner. This sometimes happened when Sophia was working nearby and Lily wanted to be close to her mother, a toddler's GPS system, simple and absolute. She had come down the corridor in her small sock feet, Gerald tucked under one arm, giraffe puzzle piece still in her hand because she had brought it to show her mother, and she came around the corner of the kitchen hallway at the exact moment that Celeste rounded it from the opposite direction. They nearly collided. Celeste stopped. Lily stopped. Gerald the elephant dangled. There was a half-second of silence that might have been the beginning of something gentle. Then Celeste's voice came down like a curtain. What is a child doing in this part of the house? Why is there a child wandering these halls unsupervised? Where is her mother? This is completely unacceptable. There are valuable items in every room of this house, and I will not have. The voice went on. It was not a shout exactly. Celeste was too controlled for shouting, but it had the qualities of a shout. The force, the sharpness, the intention to make someone understand through volume and velocity that they have committed an error that will not be tolerated. Lily's eyes went very wide. She had not been spoken to like this before. Sophia's voice was never like this. Mrs. Calloway's voice was never like this. Even when people around her were firm, they were not this. This was something new, loud and cold at the same time, like a door slammed in winter, and it was aimed at her, this small person in sock feet with a puzzle piece in her hand, and it was too much. And so Lily Reyes, 3 years old, gap-toothed and frightened and reacting with the pure, unmediated honesty of someone who does not yet know that the world expects her to absorb this quietly, raised her small hand and slapped Celeste Hargrove on the arm. Not hard, not with malice. With the startled, reflexive, entirely genuine response of a child who has been frightened and doesn't have the words yet for what that means. The silence that followed was absolute. For 3 seconds, no one in the Whitmore estate made a sound. Celeste stared down at Lily. Lily stared up at Celeste. Gerald the elephant dangled from Lily's left arm. The giraffe puzzle piece fell from her right hand and made a small sound on the marble floor, a sound that, in the silence, was enormous. Then Lily burst into tears. Not because she understood what she had done. She was 3, and the architecture of consequence was still being built inside her. She cried because she was frightened, and because the frightening loud voice was still there, and because she wanted her mother with the whole force of her small body, and she didn't have a word for any of it, so it came out as sound. "Mama," she sobbed. "Mama, mama, mama." Sophia was there in seconds. She had heard the exchange from the laundry room at the end of the corridor, had heard Celeste's voice, and had been already moving, the way mothers move when something shifts in the frequency of their child's world. She came around the corner, took in the scene in one glance, Celeste standing rigid, Lily on the floor in tears, the puzzle piece, and went straight to her daughter. "Lily, baby, I'm here." She gathered Lily up, all of her, sock feet and Gerald and shaking shoulders and wet cheeks. "I've got you. I've got you." Celeste found her voice. "Your child just struck me." Sophia looked up over Lily's head. She was holding her daughter with one arm, and her face in that moment was doing something complicated, guilt and protectiveness, and the very specific fear of a woman in a precarious position who has just watched her precarious position become more precarious. "I am so sorry," she said. She was frightened. She's 3. She doesn't. She is 3 years old, not an infant, Celeste said. She knew exactly. She was scared. The voice came from the kitchen doorway. Marcus was standing there. No one had heard him come. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms loosely crossed and his dark eyes on Celeste, and his face held an expression that was quiet and careful in the way that very serious things are quiet before they become loud. "She was scared," he said again, as if the idea was worth examining slowly. A 3-year-old got scared, and she reacted the way frightened 3-year-olds react. Celeste turned to him. "Marcus, that child physically. I heard you from the study." His voice had not changed in volume. "I heard you in the hallway, Celeste. I imagine Lily heard you before she could see you." Celeste was quiet for a moment. "I was addressing a problem. A child should not be unsupervised in the—" "Sophia," Marcus said, not unkindly, "would you take Lily to the garden? Duchess is out there. She'd probably like some company. Sophia looked at him, just for a moment, a glance of measurement, of trying to understand what was happening and whether it was safe, and then she nodded, shifted Lily higher on her hip, and carried her daughter toward the back of the house. Lily's crying had softened to sniffles. As she went past the kitchen doorway, she looked at Marcus over her mother's shoulder with her wide, still wet eyes, and for reasons he could not have explained, Marcus felt something shift in his chest like a room rearranging its furniture. He waited until he could no longer hear Lily's voice, and then he looked at Celeste. What followed was not a shouting match. Marcus Whitmore did not shout. What followed was something quieter and more consequential, a conversation in which he said things he had been circling for months without letting himself arrive at the center of them. He talked about the chefs shaking hands. He talked about Jenny crying in the laundry room, which Mrs. Calloway had mentioned 6 months ago with extreme diplomacy. He talked about Duchess retreating to the study. He talked about all the ways a house can be afraid, and what that fear says about the person it answers to. Celeste listened with the expression of someone who has been expecting a version of this conversation and has prepared for it. She was not defenseless. She had reasons for everything, a framework in which her standards were not cruelty but excellence, in which her expectations were not coldness but discipline, in which what looked from the outside like fear was actually respect. She made these arguments well. She had thought them through. Marcus listened to all of it. And then he was quiet for a long time. In the garden, through the kitchen window, he could see Sophia sitting on the stone bench near the fountain, Lily beside her, both of them watching Duchess, 11 years old and generously built, waddling toward the birds with an optimism completely untethered from probability. Lily had stopped crying. She was leaning against her mother's side. Her hand was in Sophia's hand. Gerald the elephant sat in her lap. She pointed at something and Sophia looked and said something back and Lily smiled. That gap-toothed smile, unguarded and complete. He watched that for a moment. Just that. I need some time to think, he told Celeste. I need us both to have some time. It was not a breakup. Not yet. But it was the first door opening. The next 2 weeks were a rearrangement. Celeste returned to Manhattan. The engagement was not officially paused. Marcus was careful, or perhaps uncertain, or perhaps both. But the wedding planning calls became less frequent, and Priya stopped emailing the estate about renovation schedules. The house exhaled. The staff continued their work with the particular relief of people who have been holding tension in their shoulders for so long they had forgotten what it felt like not to. Sophia noticed the change the way she noticed everything, quietly, without drawing conclusions too quickly, keeping her own counsel in the way that people who have learned to protect themselves tend to do. She was good at her job. Mrs. Calloway had told Marcus this with a brevity that, coming from Edna Calloway, was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Sophia remembered details, which rooms got morning light at what hour, which flowers Marcus preferred in the study, that the chef was working on a new menu and appreciated not being interrupted on Tuesday mornings. She learned the house the way she had learned every difficult thing in her life, by paying close attention over time. Lily continued to occupy her corner. Gerald continued to accompany her everywhere. The birds continued to arrive at the garden fountain on their reliable schedule. And Marcus, who had begun to develop the habit of pausing at the sitting room door on his way to and from his study, continued to pause. It started with the puzzle conversations. "It's a lion," Lily informed him one morning, holding up a completed puzzle with the gravity of someone presenting evidence. "It is," he agreed. "Lions are loud," she said. "So I've heard." "I'm not scared of lions," she said, in a tone that made clear she was thinking about other loud things as she said it. He sat down on the floor then, in his suit, with his coffee, across from a 3-year-old and her stuffed elephant. Mrs. Calloway walked past the open door, saw them, and kept walking with the expression of a woman who knows when not to say anything. They talked about lions. They talked about what Gerald would do if he met a lion. Hide, decided Lily, but brave hiding. They talked about whether the birds at the fountain were afraid of Duchess. No, Lily had concluded, because Duchess moved too slowly to be frightening. They talked about 3-year-old things with the particular seriousness that 3-year-olds bring to everything. Marcus could not have said why these morning conversations became necessary. He had no language for it yet, not even internal language. He knew only that there was something in Lily's total absence of performance. The way she said exactly what she meant in exactly the words she had for it, that he had not encountered in a long time in his life. His days were full of people who said one thing and meant 3 others, who performed interest and performed concern and performed honesty, while maintaining a careful distance from all 3. Lily did not know how to do that. She was, in the truest sense, undefended. He started noticing Sophia in the way you notice the quality of light when you've walked through a dark room, not with drama, but with a kind of relief that something clear is there. She was precise but not rigid, warm but not seeking. She had the quality of someone who has been through something hard and come out the other side not bitter but carefully awake, attending to the world with the particular attentiveness of a person who knows that things can change suddenly and without warning, and who has decided that the right response to that knowledge is presence rather than withdrawal. He noticed how she was with Lily. Not performed patience, real patience, the kind that doesn't require an audience. He noticed the way she listened when Mrs. Calloway talked, the way she thanked Thomas when he held a door, the way she moved through the kitchen after hours when she thought no one could see her, eating a late dinner standing at the counter with a book propped open against the fruit bowl, reading with the absorbed focus of someone for whom that particular half-hour was a treasure. He had not been looking for any of this. He had not been looking for anything. He was engaged or nearly engaged, or in a complicated space adjacent to engagement, and he was not the kind of man who looked. But there was Lily, 3 years old, in sock feet, with a stuffed elephant named Gerald, and a courage so pure it was unaware of itself. She had looked up at something overwhelming and cold and loud, and she had refused to be erased by it. She had reacted with everything she had, which was small and warm and trembling, and it had landed with a clarity that all of Marcus's careful, considered adult thinking had not managed in 18 months. He thought about that. He thought about what it meant that a child, someone who had not yet learned to look away, had seen what he had been looking away from. He thought about Daniel Reyes, whom he had looked up quietly, feeling like an intruder on someone else's grief. 31 years old. Sudden cardiac event. He'd left behind a wife who was 26 at the time, a daughter who was 14 months old. Marcus thought about what it meant to carry that, to get up every morning inside that, to take your daughter to a job in a stranger's house and set her up in a corner with puzzles and a stuffed elephant, and go do the work necessary to keep the world going. He thought about courage, what it actually looked like as opposed to what it was advertised to look like. He thought about a lot of things in those 2 weeks. He made no decisions. He made no declarations. He was 33 years old and careful in his own way, and careful men move slowly. But something had changed in the map of him, and he knew it. The decision about Celeste came in May, on a gray afternoon when rain moved across the estate in curtains and the gardens went dark and silver and beautiful in their particular wet way. Marcus made 2 phone calls. The first to his lawyer. The second to Celeste directly because he was not a man who outsourced the difficult conversations to other people. The call lasted 40 minutes. He was honest with her about what he had seen, about what he had understood, about the growing conviction that what he felt for her was admiration and attraction, and not the specific, unglamorous, quietly essential thing that he believed love was supposed to be. He did not assign blame. He did not make her into a villain in the telling of it, because he did not believe she was one. He believed she was a person who had learned to move through the world in a particular way, and that way was not his, and he was sorry it had taken him this long to be certain. Celeste was not warm in response. She was not violent or dramatic, she was too controlled for either. She was cold in the way that a window is cold in January, completely without malice, because cold is simply what it is. She said several things that were precise and pointed, and probably fair. He absorbed them. Then it was done. He stood at his study window for a long time afterward, watching the rain. Duchess came and put her head on his knee, and he scratched her ears without looking down. He did not go to Sophia that day or the next. He was not impulsive, and he was aware, very aware, of the weight of his position relative to hers. She worked for him. She was 28 and widowed and had a 3-year-old and a life constructed carefully out of necessity, and the last thing she needed was her employer deciding that what he felt was her problem to manage. He thought about that carefully. He sat with the discomfort of his own wanting and didn't let it be her responsibility. He talked to Mrs. Calloway instead. Not about Sophia directly, not at first, but about the estate, about the staff, about how things were working. And Mrs. Calloway, who had been watching the Whitmore household with the quiet, comprehensive understanding of a woman who has spent 12 years learning exactly one house, listened and then said, without looking up from the ledger she was reviewing, "She's planning to leave at the end of summer. Her cousin in Chicago has a teaching position opening. Better pay." He said nothing. "Lily starts pre-K in the fall," Mrs. Calloway added, still not looking up. "Sophia wants her in a school with a good program." He thought about that. He thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, he found Sophia in the East Wing, making up a room that had been empty all winter. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway, and her expression was professional and careful, that learned carefulness, always present, always costing her something. "Can I talk with you?" he asked. "Not as your employer, just as myself." She looked at him for a moment. A long moment, measuring. "Okay," she said. They sat in the window seat at the end of the hallway, rain still moving outside in pale gray sheets. He told her that he had ended his engagement. He told her that was not why he was there. He told her that he had been thinking about something she had said to Lily one morning in the sitting room. He had been passing in the hallway and had overheard, when Lily had said she was scared of doing the new puzzle because it had too many pieces, and Sophia had said, "You don't do all the pieces at once, baby. You just do the next one." He told her he had been thinking about that, about doing the next piece instead of looking at all the pieces at once and deciding it was too many. Sophia looked at him. "The next piece," she said carefully, "for you is what?" "I don't know," he said. "Maybe asking you to have dinner with me. Just dinner. Just a next piece." The rain moved across the window. Down in the garden, the fountain was full and running over, and the birds were gone, sheltering somewhere, but the cherry trees along the south wall were dark and gleaming and absolutely, quietly magnificent. "Lily would want to come to dinner," Sophia said finally. "I was counting on that," he said. And for the first time since she had arrived at the Whitmore estate, since the careful, professional, self-protecting arrival of a woman who had learned not to let things matter too quickly, Sophia Reyes smiled at Marcus Whitmore without thinking about whether it was safe to. The dinner was simple. That was his choice, deliberate. Not the formal dining room with its 20-foot table and its chandelier that was technically an heirloom from the original construction and had always made informal conversation feel vaguely pretentious. Not a restaurant, too performative, too much like an audition. The kitchen. The big oak table in the corner near the window that looked onto the garden, where the staff ate their own lunches, where Marcus himself sometimes sat early in the mornings with coffee and a newspaper and the particular pleasure of a room that didn't require anything of him. The chef, who had been briefed to prepare something good but not elaborate, had made roast chicken with herbs from the kitchen garden, roasted potatoes, and a salad that was more about the quality of its ingredients than any complexity of preparation. He had also, unprompted, made a small bowl of buttered noodles in the specific shape, stars, that he had observed Lily examining with interest during a visit to the kitchen the previous week. Lily sat between them at the table, Gerald propped against a salt shaker, and she ate her star noodles with the concentration of a person for whom dinner is a serious undertaking. She had worn, for the occasion, her best dress, dark red with whites, chosen by herself with great conviction from the 2 dresses her mother had offered her, and had allowed her hair to be put in 2 small puffs, which she had then decorated with stickers from her sticker collection, a detail Sophia had not fully noticed until they sat down. "You have a star on your head," Marcus observed. "I know," Lily said. "Is Gerald going to eat?" Lily gave him a look of patient indulgence. "Gerald is an elephant." "Right. Elephants don't eat noodles." A pause. "They eat hay. And bananas." And a significant look at her bowl. "Peanuts, maybe." "Do you like peanuts?" "No." This was delivered with great finality. Marcus looked across Lily's head at Sophia. Sophia was trying very hard not to laugh. They talked through dinner the way people talk when conversation is the real purpose and food is the occasion, carefully at first, then less carefully, then not carefully at all. He told her about growing up in Portland, Oregon, with a father who had built his first company from a garage and a mother who had been the most pragmatic person he had ever known, and how he had inherited one of these qualities more thoroughly than the other. She told him about Chicago, about her parents who still lived in the neighborhood where she had grown up, about Daniel. She said his name without flinching, with the clear-eyed love of someone who has found a way to hold grief and warmth in the same hand. She talked about what it had been like in those first months after, the specific mechanics of that kind of surviving, the ways Lily had simultaneously made everything harder and everything possible. "She didn't let me stop," Sophia said. "You can't stop when someone needs you to be the world." She just kept needing breakfast and stories and someone to be amazed when she found a roly-poly bug. You can't collapse when someone needs you to be amazed. Marcus thought about that, about what it meant to be kneaded into strength. "She slapped Celeste," he said, and then immediately felt he had expressed this wrong. But Sophia laughed, genuinely laughed, not the polite, careful laugh of an employee navigating the particular minefield of discussing her employer's former fiancé with her employer, but a real laugh, surprised out of her. "She was so scared," Sophia said. "I've never seen her do anything like that." "She's not. She wouldn't." "She's not that child." "But she was so frightened and so—" She shook her head, still smiling. "I've been apologizing for it internally every day since." "Don't," he said. It was the most honest thing that had happened in that house in a long time. Lily had finished her noodles and had migrated, with the easy gravitational drift of tired toddlers, into her mother's lap. She was not asleep yet, but she was heading there, her head against Sophia's chest, her thumb nearby but not quite deployed, Gerald clutched loosely. Her eyes were still open and watching Marcus with the slow, assessing blink of someone maintaining consciousness through determination alone. "You have kind eyes," she informed him, with the authority of a person reporting a fact. The world was very quiet for a moment. "Thank you," Marcus said, and his voice was not entirely steady. "Daddy had kind eyes," Lily said. She said this without grief, with the matter-of-fact simplicity of a child who has been raised to speak of her father as real and present and beloved, even in his absence. "Mama showed me pictures." Sophia's hand moved over Lily's hair. She was looking at Marcus, and whatever she had been protecting herself from, whatever distance she had been maintaining, it was still there, it was still appropriate, it was still hers to maintain, but her eyes were honest. "She says that," Sophia said softly. I want her to know him. She will, Marcus said. Because of you. Lily's eyes had finally closed. Her breathing had deepened and evened into sleep, small and complete and trusting in her mother's arms, Gerald the elephant at rest beside her. The kitchen was warm. The garden outside was dark and full of spring sounds, frogs somewhere, and the wind in the cherry trees, and the faint sound of the fountain that ran all night now that the weather had turned. I'm not going to tell you I know what any of this is, Marcus said carefully. I don't want to tell you something I can't be sure of. What I can tell you is that I haven't felt honest in a long time, and I feel honest right now at this table, talking to you. Sophia was quiet for a moment, looking at her sleeping daughter. I'm not easy to be around, she said. I'm careful. I've had to be. And I come with. She looked at Lily, at Gerald, at the small world that was Lily's world. I come with everything. I know, he said. That's not a warning that's going to work on me. She looked at him. Next piece, she said quietly. Next piece, he agreed. What came after that was not a fairy tale, not in the way fairy tales are usually told, with a clarity of resolution, a neatness of transformation. What came after was slower and more real. More dinners, more kitchen conversations, more mornings at the sitting room door, more Lily explaining the precise emotional lives of Gerald and his various acquaintances. Mrs. Calloway observed it all with the satisfaction of a woman who has seen enough of human nature to know that the good things are usually quiet. Thomas drove them all to the nature preserve in July and pretended not to notice when Marcus held Sophia's hand on the walking trail while Lily charged ahead in her yellow boots, naming everything she encountered. The chef made star noodles more often, without being asked. In August, Sophia did not leave for Chicago. Lily started pre-K at the Cedar Falls School that September, and on the first morning, she carried Gerald in one arm and her new backpack on her back, and she stood at the classroom door with the combined courage and terror of all first mornings, and she turned around once to look at her mother. Sophia crouched down. Next piece, she said. Lily turned back to the door. She walked in. And somewhere in that moment, in the ordinary, extraordinary, irreducible fact of a child walking toward her life, while her mother watched with her whole heart in her face, was everything that mattered. Not the estate, not the money, not the end of one story and the beginning of another. Just this, a woman who had built something from the rubble of her grief, and a little girl who had walked into the house of fear with her stuffed elephant and her fearlessness and had simply, honestly, completely refused to disappear. The cherry trees along the south wall were already beginning to turn. The fountain ran on. Gerald watched over everything with his faithful button eye, patient and present and full of love. And